Hi, everyone. I'm really glad to be here, and I've appreciated all of your being in Elder Tree and being with all of you and listening to your stories. It's been wonderful. My story starts back in the 1600s. That's when ancestors on both sides of my family arrived on these shores from Europe. I'm going to skip ahead a few centuries. Two of my maternal grandfathers were Unitarian ministers. One was Charles Billings, who had a parish in Lowell, Mass. in 1890. The other was Edward Crowninshield. He had parishes in Dedham, Mass. And Belfast, Maine in the mid-1800s. My mother's family is of English origin. Many of her ancestors lived in Salem, Mass. I'm not sharing the screen here. Oh, all right. Never mind. Many of her ancestors lived in Salem, Mass. Behind me is one of them, Uncle Doctor. Are you going to show?
No, I have to stop. Turn this.
Okay, I'm sorry, we have technical things here. Behind me is one of my ancestors, Uncle Doctor or Benjamin Cox, whose portrait dates back to the 1840s. He was a doctor and an uncle of a great-great-grandfather. Looking at Uncle Doctor today reminds me of all the privilege I have had, and I feel sort of uncomfortable about it. My mother, Fran, was born in 1921. Her father, Theodore C. Brown, was a patent attorney and a chemical engineer. The family lived for a time in Hinsdale, Illinois, and in Michigan. During the summers, they would take the train east to spend the summer in Chicarawa, New Hampshire. The family homestead, which I will describe later on. One summer, they made the trip in their Model T, leaving it in the barn for summer use. In the 1930s, they moved to Winchester, Mass, to a house on 37 Calumet Road. Fran attended the Buckingham School in Cambridge for high school and Wheelock College in Boston for her degree in teaching. My father's side of the family, the Verplanks, are of Dutch ancestry and lived in Beacon, New York, on the Hudson River in a house dating back to pre-American Revolution. There are lots of details related to those times, which I will not focus on here. My father, Bert Verplank, was born in Schenectady, New York in 1919. His father, William Everett Verplank, was a turbine engineer at General Electric in Schenectady. The family moved to Salem, Mass. In 1921 to be at the GE in Lynn, Mass. I know some of you have General Electric and Schenectady connections. My father was the third of 4 boys. Their address was 21 Chestnut Street in Salem. He attended Phillips Exeter Academy in Exeter, New Hampshire for high school. He earned his degree in civil engineering at Yale College, or now Yale University. I was born in Winchester, Mass. In 1948, the oldest of 4 children. I lived in several locations in my early years: Germany, Texas, North Carolina. My father was first lieutenant in the Army during World War II. He was called back and served in Germany. My sister Kay, 14 months younger than me, my mother and I moved to be with him in Germany when I was 2 and 3 years old. Upon his return, he had several to the States. He had several engineering positions. The first in Texas for 4 months, then North Carolina for 2 years, where my brother Ted and sister Charlotte were born. I attended first grade there, no kindergarten in our town. When I was 7, he got a job at Stone and Webster, an engineering firm in Boston, where he worked as a civil engineer designing dams for 35 years. We moved to Beverly on the North Shore next to Salem. My mother, Fran, had a teaching degree from Wheelock College in Boston. She knew how to hold a group of children spellbound for 20 minutes as she told a story or shared nature lore with them. She was a self-taught naturalist, knew the names of prodigious numbers of plants and their life cycles. My mother showed great enthusiasm for things. During walks in the woods, I can still hear her voice calling out in breathy, enthusiastic tones, "Lady slippers," when she saw the early spring flower related to the orchid in the New Hampshire woods. Or Indian pipes for a ring of the white members of the mushroom family, also in the woods. Growing up, we made terrariums and labeled and pressed wildflowers between wax paper. Much later, my mother founded the Winchester Trails, a program that included a guidebook she had helped write on the flora and fauna of the woods in Winchester. She was a trail guide and also trained other volunteer trail guides who would guide the 4th graders in town on the extensive trails as they learned about woodland lore. The program operates to this day. My father, Bert, was very athletic and led us in hiking, skiing, and camping. He was one of the early New Hampshire skiers who would take the snow train from his southern New Hampshire boarding school to the White Mountains for the weekend and school vacations. He skied many times in Tuckerman's Ravine on Mount Washington, Mount Washington, New Hampshire, which during the winter became a snow bowl due to snow blowing off the summit and the surrounding mountains. By spring, the very steep sides had 60 to 70 degree incline. He took great pride in skiing over the head wall of the ravine and on down the steep slope, carving carefully formed Galandasprungs, a jump turn in skiing, usually over a mogul that is made from a low crouch with the aid of both ski poles. Bert was particularly proud of the day he made 2 runs to Tuckerman's, a massive mountain without a ski lift. The 2 runs involved climbing the mountain twice. And you can see how he's climbing in the picture there. I think I'd like to stop for a minute and just let's take a moment of silence to think about poor Max for a minute. I'm so sad. So we'll just observe that for a minute. And now I will resume. We'll keep them in our prayers. It's such a sad thing. He took my siblings and me up to Tuckerman's when I was in my teens. I've been back several times and eventually did go over the head wall. Rather than doing a more vertical descent in the style of my father and staying close to the fall line, I proceeded with an extra caution, executing very long and shallow traverse turns all the way down. We learned to ski on wooden skis on the medium steep hill next to our house in Beverly. In some of the places we skied, we hiked up the hill or mountain, like at Tuckerman's, then skied down. At other locations, we used long rope tows, or one hand holding the rope in the front and the other behind which to get up the mountain. It was an art to learn how to use the rope tow. There were also T-bars and chairlifts. By the mid-1960s, there were more chairlifts and some gondolas. The next part is a tale of 6 generations of my family's connection to our property in Chicarawa, New Hampshire. I have a large extended family, and we would get together for holidays and often during the summers. My great-grandmother, Charlotte C. Brown, was generation 1, purchased a farmhouse with a spectacular view of Mount Chicarawa in the White Mountains of New Hampshire in 1915. She gave it to her son, my grandfather, Theodore C. Brown, generation 2. He married Alice Billings, my grandmother, in 1918. They had 3 children, generation 3, my mother Fran, my uncle Ted, and my aunt Sally. Each of the children in generation 3 married and had 4 children, generation 4. I am part of generation 4. Okay, in my immediate family, you can see, so it's Ann, I'm standing in back. My siblings Kay on the left, Charlotte in the flowered dress, my brother Ted behind, and let's see, and Charles when he was little, and my parents, of course. And this is on the event of their 50th wedding anniversary in 1996. Anyway, generations 2, my grandparents, and generation 3, their children, including my mother, would spend the summers in Chicarawa. The farmhouse, called the Big House, dated back to the early 1800s. The property also includes a barn, a shop my grandfather built, containing a bounty of tools and many types, woodworking, metal lathes, you name it. The bungalow and camp. The bungalow was my great-grandmother's portable summer home, moved up from near Salem, Massachusetts. It is farther down the field from the Big House and also has a spectacular view of the mountains. The camp is a 1-story rustic building built with with a living room, family area, a kitchen, 2 bedrooms, a bathroom, and also has great views. Being in Chicarawa was a sanctuary for us all. During the summer, our family, generations 3 and 4, would spend 2 weeks in Chicarawa, and some years the entire summer. With 3 places to stay, the 3 families could stay and have a jolly time. But the 3 families were only there together a few times. Cousins would come play Monopoly and Clue on the piazza or the bungalow porch, overlooking Mount Chicarawa, and visit with Nana as she played solitaire. There were also games of capture the flag and paddling in a small boat in the swamp. I have fond memories of us sitting around the Big House dining room table, eating my grandmother's blueberry buckle and talking of topics of the day. Later, toward retirement years, my grandparents, generation 2, winterized the house and retired there. My grandfather, as my cousin said, loved machinery of all kinds. He became a much valued neighbor, and would enthusiastically tackle any mechanical problem. My grandfather was brilliant and had a photographic memory. He could read an article once and be able to quote any part of it verbatim. He was also highly opinionated and wouldn't hesitate to call you a damn fool if your idea irked his cockles. He had valuable ideas that added considerably to the local community. While he was well respected for his intellect, he was not the easiest person to be around. Several times, my family would stay at the camp for a week during the winter February vacation. The building would be heated only with a wood stove. As some of you have described about your summer places in cold months upon arrival, it would be ice cold, but could be heated to a toasty warm next to the fire. We did have electricity, but no plumbing in the winter. We would wear hats to bed, and you could see your breath in the bedroom. My family was a one-car family all the way through. When we lived in Beverly, my father commuted to work on the Boston and Maine train. On weekdays, he would walk 1 mile to the train station, take the train to Boston. Once there, would walk another mile to his downtown office. When we lived in Winchester, for my high school years, he commuted again via train from home to Boston and back with the 1 mile walk at either end. In Beverly, the house we lived in for 7 years, 6 of us shared a bathroom and a half. In Beverly, around 1956, and for 5 years, my mother was a volunteer superintendent of the Sunday school, a position now called the Director of Religious Education at the First Parish Church in Beverly, Unitarian Universalist. When we lived in Winchester, she taught Sunday school, 2nd and 3rd graders with a close friend for many years. In 1963, my parents retired, moving from their house in Winchester to their now winterized house in Chicago. My family, generations 3 and 4, purchased their Winchester house and moved from Beverly to Winchester. I was entering grade 9. We attended the Winchester Unitarian Society at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Winchester. The minister, Reverend Robert Storer, had a background in theater. He had excellent presentation skills and made sermons dynamic and exciting. He also brought those skills, dynamic and exciting skills, to the high school Bible class he taught to about 20 of us who gathered for his class an hour before church started. I attended throughout grades 10 through 12. At church, I also regularly attended LRY, or Liberal Religious Youth, who some of you have also done. My grandmother was on the Ministerial Search Committee, who in 1950 found Reverend Storer. He shared that one of his first memories of Winchester was my grandmother welcoming him to the church at a meeting held at my grandmother's house, 37 Calumet Road. I just made this connection as I prepared the talk. Here was my grandmother, Alice Billings Brown, the daughter of Reverend Charles Billings, welcoming this dynamic minister to the Winchester Church, a minister whose presence helped me greatly through high school. He remained in Winchester 19 years until his retirement in 1969. I was in Girl Scouting from Brownies through Senior Scouting. My mother was leader during the early years. Brownies through 6th grade. I enjoyed the activities. I regularly attended Sunday school from grade 2 through, as I mentioned, high school. Throughout my childhood, we hiked extensively in the White Mountains with my family. Amongst my siblings, I was the least athletic. As a kid on the frequent hikes, the others would charge on ahead as I straggled behind. When I arrived at the summit, 10 minutes after they had, I would hear the resounding chorus of, "Always the last one." I loved being outside on the hikes, but was always slow. It wasn't until 10 years ago that I discovered that I have low blood pressure, which makes it harder to go faster. I have to be aware of my trigger signs, such as heat, high humidity, lightheadedness. If I do not stay hydrated and monitor my signs, I could possibly faint. I graduated from Winchester High School in 1966. I attended LaSalle Junior College, now called LaSalle University, in Auburndale, a western suburb of Boston, where I got my associate's degree in liberal arts. Then I transferred to UMass in Amherst, Mass, where I got my BA in elementary education. I was a teacher aide for a year and also worked some with daycare. Although I trained to be a teacher, I realized that being a teacher in a full-time classroom was not the right fit for me. I became a secretary at Mass General Hospital for 6 years. Later, I worked for 3 years at Northeastern University as a senior secretary to a professor of chemistry and biomedical science. During those young adult years, I lived in various apartments around Boston, Cambridge, Watertown, Allston, and for a while in the third floor apartment of my parents' Victorian house in Winchester. Also during that time, I dated, including a 5-year live-in relationship with a boyfriend that did not work out. In 1980, I moved to Medford and started attending the UU Church of Medford. Medford was right next door to Winchester. I bought my first car at age 26. Up until then, I had done very well using the excellent public transportation around Boston. Although I have a background of privilege, I had a low self-opinion and had been having trouble making friends for years. I realized when things did not go smoothly with 2 different roommates my freshman year at college, that it was time for a change of course in my behavior. I will digress for a moment as I talk about my successful roommate from sophomore year at LaSalle. And this is for you, Linda Friedman, if you're on, I'm not sure. Okay. Kim was a real theater buff. On many weekends, we took the train to New York City and would see 2 or one time 3 Broadway musicals and/or shows in one weekend. On occasion, we watched from the back of the theater while standing. Usually, though, we sat in the balcony. For Equus, we sat in seating on the stage. Okay. I'm a survivor of substantial emotional abuse. My grandfather, brilliant as he was also arrogant, highly opinionated, judgmental, and belittling. I was afraid of him and withdrew to be within myself. Sometimes my father also belittled me. My siblings and kids at school teased me. I did not have close friends in high school. I, unfortunately, had adopted some patterns of undermining people myself. I spent my 20s and early 30s doing self-help of one type or another, going to therapy and various encounter groups. Insight Transformational Seminars was an experiential program I was involved in which I found much value, and where I learned about creating one's best potential. I am so grateful to my therapist, Kristen White, with whom I worked for 8 years. She brought to my attention a whole family dynamic of negativity. My mother, the middle child of 3, was also teased. Her older brother frequently gave her a kind of burn, and you may know what I mean, where he twisted the skin of the forearm in one direction, while simultaneously twisting the skin closer to the elbow in the opposite direction. Her mother, my grandmother Alice, did not know how to support Fran or help Fran stand up for herself. Alice also did not know how to stand up for herself to my grandmother and his dominating, abusive ways. My mother, grandmother, and I were each the identified victims, or the ones dumped on, of our respective generations. Kristen had each of my parents separately attend a session with me. She was quite persuasive, and they ended up also doing therapy with her for a short time. She even convinced my 82-year-old grandmother to go to a session with my mother. We are fortunate that through Kristen, my father realized his belittling ways, and I don't believe I saw those ways after that time. With Kristen, I met once a week for an individual session, once a week for an evening group session, and once every 3 months with that group for an all-day session. I will never forget the night during my 7th year with Kristen when I was willing to let in the feedback from other group members about how my behavior negatively affected them. I listened carefully and was very vulnerable. They gave me a lot of support and loving. I let go of being defensive and continued being vulnerable. That was my turning point. Kristen recommended that I continue therapy for another year so I could learn how to make friends. I did. It was an excellent decision. I cleared the way for being in the relationships I am now in. Upon completion, I rewarded myself with a 3-week trip to Europe and purchasing these Shogun vases that you can see behind me on the wall. Yeah, is that right? Yeah, right there. Bob and I met at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Medford. As a physics professor from Muskingum College in New Concord, Ohio, he came to Medford for the summer to collaborate with a colleague at Tufts University. He was single and decided to check out the local churches. He came to the right one. It had a small congregation, and I was active there on the board and committees and often made announcements from the pulpit. We connected. After 1 year of long distance dating, we married in 1988. I was 39 years old. I moved to Ohio, where I felt at home, living in a Victorian house on a street paved with bricks in a historic section of Zanesville. So you can see our picture from our wedding with all the family. Very special. Bob grew up in Florida, got a bachelor's degree at North Carolina State University and a PhD in physics at U of Texas in Austin. He did 6 years of postdoctoral work in Germany at the Max Planck Institute of Physics in Munich and at the University of Mainz. He returned to the US in 1983 for the position at Muskingum College. Bob grew up Methodist and Episcopalian. Later on, friends in Texas steered him to the Unitarian Universalist Church at the First UU Church of Austin. During the 5 years before I arrived in Ohio, from 1983 to 1988, Bob had been attending First Unitarian Universalist Church in Columbus, 60 miles away. It was the closest UU church. Although it was so distant, Bob enjoyed the break from a small town and the camaraderie that the Columbus church provided. He met Joel Miller there when Joel was a jeweler. Joel was away at seminary by the time I arrived. For those new to the church, Reverend Joel Miller was an interim minister here in Rochester a few years ago. Bob and I would drive to Columbus almost every Sunday and would occasionally drive in for midweek events. A downside of marrying later in life is that getting pregnant was a challenge. After struggling with infertility for several years, we were thrilled when our son Charles arrived on his own accord, healthy, in 1992 after a smooth, uneventful pregnancy. I was 43. Before Charles was born, I was able, there's a cute picture, huh? Before Charles was born, I was able as a faculty spouse to take childhood education courses to supplement my elementary education background at Muskingum College at no charge. One was children's literature. I also worked as a before-school teacher at the Muskingum College program supporting the adjacent elementary school. I was so fortunate to be able to be an at-home mom. Taking Charles to playgroups, even when he was an infant, I was by far the oldest mom present. It gave me a youthful perspective. Throughout the years, I was able to volunteer at his classes at school and activities, including being a den mother for Cub Scouts, a coach for Odyssey of the Mind in middle school, and robotics in high school. In 2002, a position opened at RIT that was perfect for Bob. He accepted the offer and we moved to Rochester in August 2002. When Charles, age 10, heard that we were going to move, he was angry and upset. When we came to Rochester to look for a house, we showed him around and took him to the Rhinos soccer game. By the end of the game, Charles was jumping up and down and cheering for his new home team. We started at First Unitarian that fall. Dick Gilbert had just retired. Something that was very helpful to me at the Columbus Church was a women's sharing circle, which would meet once a month. Every fall, we would have a weekend retreat at a state park or camping area cabin. Those friendships made a huge difference for me. In 2005, I was still missing my Columbus women's group. I approached Reverend Scott Taylor about forming a women's group, and he incorporated that request with a sign up at the Adult Spiritual Growth Fair. We ended up with a group of 8. Actually, enough other people signed up to have 2 more groups. I don't know how those groups fared, but in ours, 5 of us stayed together and met for 10+ years. We got to know each other well, and it felt important to be part of each other's lives. Bob called it my highly successful women's group. The group ended when 2 members moved out of state. In 2006, in Portland, Oregon, at my first General Assembly, I had the pleasure of attending a workshop presented by our own Libby Moore, Jen Crow, and Joy Collins, introducing Wellspring to the world. For people new to the church, they, along with Reverend Tina Simpson, had developed the program that Jen Crow had conceptualized, and it had been going on at our church for a year or more. Let's see, I got to the session early, sat in the front row and cheered them on. I was so proud of them. The room, set up for 30 people, soon overflowed, necessitating a quick setup of many more chairs. I knew Wellspring was a big commitment and took a year before I enrolled to participate in 2006. It made a huge difference for me. The listening without judgment was helpful. It was wonderful to have the unbiased listening ear of my spiritual guide. Hiking and exercise became spiritual practices of mine. I also incorporated being appreciative of food from the awareness of it growing in the ground, to selecting it at the farmer's market, to cooking and sharing special meals, some gourmet, and eating in a mindful fashion. It's something I continue to do. Wellspring has been a wonderful resource and sanctuary for me, so much healing. I continued in Wellspring for 4 or 5 more years. Currently, I'm co-facilitator of a Soul Matters group I've been with for 5 or 6 years. During the COVID shutdown, in addition to working with the packet once a month, our group checked in weekly online. Those close relationships are so important. Other ways I participated in church. I participated with the RE program throughout the time that Charles was growing up here, from 4th grade through high school. I taught classes for 2nd grade, 3-year-olds, kindergartners, 1st grade, etc. I served on the RE board for 3 years with Jan Gartner when she was Director of Religious Education. I volunteered at con weekends, the UU district-sponsored youth conferences, and drove youth group teens to the cons at churches across New York State. I continue working in RE with Sheila Shu, where I am often a traveler with the K through 5 group, the teacher who accompanies the children to the various workshops they have each week. Part-time jobs that I had in Rochester. Remember how newspapers were printed on paper? My job was to scan the papers and use scissors to cut out articles of our clients for a newspaper clipping service. I scanned medical records into a hospital database after having medical terminology training. For about 8 years, I've been a companion to the elderly through an agency. We helped people at their homes or living facility with light housework, shop for groceries, drive them to doctor's appointments, and spend quality time visiting with them. We are non-medical, so do not change bandages or fill pill containers. As a companion, I've met some fascinating people. Bob says that when I came home from some of my office jobs, I would be stressed. When I came home from my job as a companion, I would be happy. How biking came into my life. Susie and John Farrell, for a while, organized bike rides on weekends in the Mendon countryside. I joined them one time on a clunker bike of mine from the 1970s. The mechanics of the bike were stiff, pedals hard to push, gears not conveniently placed. I didn't even think to check the pressure of the tires, which turned out to be quite soft. Although I was out riding and glad to be in their company, the ride was a struggle. A short time later, my neighbor on Little Spring Run invited me to join her and her husband on a bike ride for charity along the Erie Canal. I brought my clunker bike. It was a hot, very hot day, so doing an 8-mile ride on a clunker was, again, a struggle. Then I rented a currently made bike. What a difference. I bought one and started riding along the canal frequently. I think it was a trek. In my job as a companion for the elderly, I would drive one of my clients around parts of Wayne County and take him to lunch at a senior center. A number of times we saw bicycle riders hanging out along the Erie Canal Park in Macedon and other places they would congregate. As we would often stop and talk with people, we stopped, spoke with the bikers, and discovered ins and outs of their group. Later on, my time freed up and I was able to ride with the group on their weekly Thursday morning rides. Soon I became interested in the cycle the Erie Canal rides from Buffalo to Albany, which occur the second week in July over an 8-day period. It was a supported ride, which meant that ride organization carried your gear and provided food and snacks. We camped at designated sites along the route. I participated for 4 years. The first year, when I didn't know what to expect, I took the 2-day option and rode from Buffalo to Fairport. Oh, I'm missing some of my thing. Hold on a sec. At 13.
Gonna have to ad lib it. Just keep going.
So the second and third year, I went all the way to the 360 miles from Albany to Buffalo to Albany. And the fourth year, I did half the ride and ended in Syracuse. And yeah. One of the things I liked about the Erie Canal was it reminded me of my parents. And they were very involved with the Middlesex Canal in Boston. The Middlesex Canal was the first canal built in this country, and it connected Boston to Lowell, Massachusetts, and beyond to the New Hampshire rivers and markets, farm markets, and industry. So that was an important link. So my parents, they were volunteers there for 25 years. And my father was being a civil engineer. Well, he wrote a book that was documenting the path of the canal. I forgot to say the Erie Canal, the Middlesex Canal, unlike the Erie Canal, the Middlesex Canal now only looks like a canal in a very small port place. The rest of the canal is obliterated by progress. My father, in a book he wrote, documented the path of the canal, including in the obliterated places, and some of them were hard to find. And then, let's see, someone else who was in the Middlesex Canal Association, other people were Carl Seaberg and Alan Seaberg. They were and they wrote a book about the canal entitled The Incredible Ditch, and they dedicated it to my parents. Let's see, some of you may know the name, people in the choir probably know the name Carl Seaberg, because he wrote the words to many 8 hymns in the Living the Tradition hymn book. So that was sort of special to have that. So there's lots of connections. And I guess that sort of sums up, that's the end of my prepared remarks. So, and you can feel free to ask questions. I don't know, I'm almost out of time.
No, we have another, it's only 10:51. So I'm going to put you on put us all on gallery views. And if you remember how to raise your hand, that would be helpful. If you want to ask Ann a question. And I just have to say how grateful I am for your dedication to the church and to all that you've done there. And I always considered you our most faithful Wellspring person, because you took every class as it came, as we offered it. And I really loved that.
Thank you.
And I was grateful to get to know you there.
Thank you.
So does anyone have questions they would like to ask Ann? Deborah has her hand up.
Well, coming into this discussion, Anne, I was curious about where your love of nature and your love of being active it came from, because you just always amaze me. It's like, oh yeah, I'm going to ride the Erie Canal to Albany. Oh, we're going to sail here and there. I mean, we hiked here. We looked at this. So it was wonderful to hear how this is sort of grown up around you and you were nurtured for it. So that was just wonderful. And the other thing is, I just so appreciate your candor and courage to talk to us about the challenges that you've faced. Being exposed to emotional abuse is just so challenging, and you've worked so hard to recover. And so I am honored to listen to that story and to just applaud you for the constant work, because it takes work. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Barb
Barb.
DeLeo has her hand up.
And this has been an amazing elder tree. What a complex and intricate life you've had. And I didn't realize that when I first met you, that you were just coming to First Unitarian, because there's so many little touchstones that I remember. We've been in Soul Matters and Wellspring groups over the years, touched base on a variety of things. And I especially remember you doing that Albany bike ride, because I was so jealous that you actually, you and I had talked about it often. And then all of a sudden you just did it. And it was like, go, Ann, this is great, right? But I also want to share with you that you inspired Barry and I to stop at Walden Pond and hike around, because you spoke so much about your family property in the Northeast and how important it was. And so one year on our way back from Maine, we stopped in Lowell, we stopped in several places, including Walden Pond. So I just want to thank you for your friendship and say today was just delightful. And I agree with Deborah, the hard work that you've done. I've seen that progress over 20 years, and you are just an amazing human being. Thank you for being part of our community.
Thank
Bob's
you
a
very
lucky
much.
man. Bob's a very
Thank
lucky
you.
man.
Thank you.
I do.
Anita, go ahead. You need to unmute yourself. No, you turned your camera off, but now you need to turn your camera on and unmute.
Can you hear me now?
There you go.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, my picture. Sorry about
Yes.
that. Okay, I just wanted to mention that I was really interested in your long Unitarian Universalist tradition and your family and the whole very strong sense of place that you have. And I'm sure that that is connected to your family history of being in this country for such a long time. My family came from Denmark, and so my generation is the first generation that's from the United States, and it makes a very interesting contrast. And then your willingness to share some things on a personal level, and I thought that was
see how there's no red thing there anymore.
very
Yeah.
brave.
Oh yeah.
So thank you very much. And we've not met before personally, but I was very interested in hearing your story.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And Howie and Mary, you next.
We got to see what Bob looked like when he was a young man with you and at your wedding. Is he willing to put his face in front of the camera now so we can say hello? Thank you.
Jane Tuttle wrote in the chat, what a great story, and I loved your photos, thanks, which I did. I loved the way you wove the photos in, because
Yes.
it is so interesting to see people when they're younger. Lynn Kinsman, go ahead. And then Laura Humphrey, and then that'll probably be it. folks.
Hi, Anne. How are you?
Hi, fine.
Sorry, I joined a little late, but I really, really enjoyed your inspiring story. I just wondered what your son Charlie might be doing now and how your life intertwines with his, if it does, and if that's a part of your life now.
Sure. Our son Charles, he's doing well. He went to Muskingum College in he went to Hampshire College in Amherst, Mass. And he is now he's living in the South Wedge. He has a job at Measures for Justice, which is a nonprofit, and he does eye-tech things. Measures for Justice. You describe it, Bob. It's a day. Yeah.
They gather information about criminal justice systems around the country and put it all in a uniform format so people can compare, how long it takes to go from arrest to trial to incarceration and so on. And anyway, so he is the computer security person there.
Yeah. He lives in the South Wedge with roommates. He's been there, same, people that he's lived with for about 5 years, and he seems pretty stable. I don't know if there's relationships in the picture right now, but he has his friends. He has some good friends there, so he's doing okay.
That's nice that he's close. Thanks
Yeah.
for filling in. And
Sure.
Laura, did you want to ask a question? I could see you.
Yes, I actually was also going to ask about Charles, but when you were talking, I thought maybe if you could just briefly describe one event that I know of in particular that must have inspired your son in social justice work, and that was your trip to Washington.
Oh, you mean the Women's March?
Yes.
Yeah. In terms of my son, or
No.
yeah.
I just
okay.
said he must have been inspired by some of your efforts, and that's one in particular I remember.
Yes. Yeah, I did go to the March on Washington, and I was inspired by Paul Miner. Paul Miner got a whole bunch of us together, and it was good. I was glad I went. So yeah, I haven't done that much social justice work, but that was one of them. And then we went again in April. Bob and I went for the scientist march in April. So
that's wonderful.
This has been such a treat, and thank you so much. I'm going to say goodbye, everybody. It has been a delight to see you. Next week, we're going to have a conversation about gratitude because it's the Sunday or Saturday before Thanksgiving. So we'll figure out how that's going to look. Thanks to the Elder Buddies. Thanks to you, and thanks, Bob, for backing her up and helping with the pictures and stuff. It was good to have a team there. I love the teamwork. And thank you to all of you. I love you guys. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Thank you.